Hello, everyone. Marc Sabatella with the Mastering MuseScore School here, and welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, January 6th, 2021. First time I've maybe said that out loud. Um, so I would like to welcome everyone here. I hope everyone had a nice little whatever kind of break you all were able to have, and I took a nice break myself, and I yeah, I'm back, ready to start talking some more about MuseScore and all the things that we can be doing. So today's topic is really, I don't know, it's just sort of a general catch-all for things. So I'm always just happy to answer any questions. And I don't even remember what originally put this thought in my head, but there's so many aspects of MuseScore. Last a couple times ago, we talked about text in particular, and let me get the chat going here. We talked about text and all these different types of text, and somehow this just um, got me also thinking about numbers as a sort of a related topic. These are some numbers that might appear in your score, but also numbers that have to do with just the settings within MuseScore. And so, yeah, I'll just go over a bunch of these things, but as always, just feel free to just ask questions on any topic, and I'm happy to go there. So, um, and happy to see people from all around the world here. Yeah, and actually, I guess when I look at this, it's probably at least of the people who are actually chiming in with locations, it's more than half of people from outside the US where I am. So it's always just good to see such a worldwide audience. Okay, so I have just a number of things that I know that I wanted to talk about. Um, yeah, this is all getting back together here. So reunion. Um, so I'm yeah, there's a few things that I had written down in my own little checklist of things that I wanted to make sure I talked about. And really, the most important one that I wanted to start with is talking about a unit that is used all over the place in MuseScore. And I don't know that everyone necessarily understands what it's about. So let me select something. It doesn't even matter what I select. Actually, I'll select this tempo marking here. And the unit that I'm talking about is SP. SP stands for a word that's probably not even really a word. Spatium. I don't even know if that's how you would pronounce it. Spatium, spatium, Spatium. It sounds vaguely Latin, but I don't know that it would have existed back in the day in Latin because I don't know that it really means anything. What it means, though, in MuseScore, or really in any notation program, is it's the distance between two staff lines. This is the basic unit of measure of pretty much anything in MuseScore. So this is saying here that well, I've got a tempo marking selected, and uh, the this is telling me that the offset of this is two staff spaces. We could just call that staff space if you want. Um, it's better, more meaningful word than spadium, perhaps. So this is telling us that the default position of this text is two staff spaces above the staff. And it's measuring from, as we can see here, the baseline of the text, and it's measured from the top staff line. So this is telling me it's two staff spaces above. Now, it could be that this slur has actually, yeah, that slur actually pushed it further above. Um, this is two staff spaces above. So this is what that normally would look like. And then if I increase this, say to minus 2.5 or minus 3, minus 4, you see it going up as I change that value to a larger negative number. Negative numbers go up, positive numbers go down. And that's something else that maybe takes a minute to get used to, but it's definitely the way the way things are in MuseScore, that everything is negative numbers mean up, positive numbers mean down. So it does mean hitting the up arrow will move things down when you're in this spin box. That's a little side note also having to do with numbers there. So I'm going to reset that back to its default. In fact, I'm just going to undo deleting. There we go. In fact, I'm going to close this score and reopen it. So the deal is I am using MuseScore 3.6 here. It's not released yet. This is still the release candidate that was released, whenever it was, a week or so ago. And yeah, we found there's a few bugs that still need to be fixed before we release it officially, but it's basically all working. So I've adapted Reunion to use the new fonts and settings. I haven't completely cleaned things up. Like when I look right off the bat, I can see this tuplet setting here doesn't look like. I think I previously had that angled, and I must have reset that when I imported it or something. So I'm going to fix that in a minute. But let's make sure that we have sound, shall we? You all are hearing this. I'm not going to talk a ton about what we talked about before. Okay, so anyhow, that's the piece, the first half of it, anyhow, and hopefully the sound was working, and so that unit of measurement is used everywhere, as I said. Like you can look in all sorts of places, like with with a note selected. Like let me select this D flat here. You'll see that there's a leading space adjustment here. This is how much extra space to add in front of that note, and it's measured in that same unit of spadian. So as I increase that, you'll see that note is getting further away. I will reset it. And by the way, we keep changing exactly how this works. I think if I click this and drag it, I guess I can't. We, I think I have to double click it and then drag it sideways. And it's basically it's adjusting the chord offset. I think there's also something where like shift plus doing it addresses the leading space. I forget. We keep changing how that all works. So, if you need to adjust the spacing of individual notes, you can use the leading space adjustment here in the inspector or the chord offset. The difference, by the way, is going to be more obvious if I try to adjust this note here. If I adjust the chord offset, only that note moves, right? However, if I adjust the leading space, you'll see it affects that entire slice of time. That's what a segment is. A segment is a slice of time. So it affects this whole vertical slice, all the notes that happen at that same time. Okay, so the retard is not actually there's nothing new. Let's put it that way. This is just a tempo marking in which I just lowered the tempo a little bit. I just changed the tempo to be a little bit slower, and then the Piomoso a little bit faster. So it's just a sudden tempo change. It's not gradual, but frankly, can you really tell the difference? Yeah, not that much. So if you really wanted this to be a gradual tempo change rather than suddenly getting slower, you can just add additional invisible tempo markings to do that. And we do honor the number here. And so again, I'll tie it into talking about numbers. Notice the original tempo marking had in it a 120. And in the inspector, hopefully my face isn't covering that up. In the inspector, the follow text box is checked, and that means it's going to look in the text to see if it can see anything it can interpret. And it sees, oh yeah, I see a quarter note is 120, so that's what I'm going to do. For the retard, there is nothing in the text it knows how to do, so I just put in a number explicitly here. There's also, though, a really nice plugin you can use. So if I delete that marking and come up here and say plugins, tempo changes, and then I can put Poco Rit as my text and tell it I want to start at 120 and end, say, at 108. So it gradually slows down. It will add the Poco Rit, and it added a bunch of invisible tempo markings there also. Let me turn on invisible markings so you can see them. Look at all those invisible tempo markings it added. Let's hear what that sounds like. So in that case, it actually blew away my other tempo marking that I had at the end of that section, I think. So anyhow, that you can use um, that plugin to kind of automate adding these invisible tempo markings if you are interested in having that sort of thing. But for my purposes, I generally find I'm just undoing everything because I want to get back where I started. I generally find that for a lot of these purposes, just a single tempo change is enough to make it feel like a retard, even if it wasn't really that gradual. So one other thing to know as far as the whole number business, check this out. I'm going to make a score in 6/8, more numbers, right? Um, in 6/8 time, and this is something that you should know if you don't already, when you originally learn about time signatures, you might learn that, oh, that means the eighth note has the beat and there's six of them in a measure. That's not really how this is counted, right? This is really counted as if we were in, the plugin is called uh, Tempo Changes. And like all plugins, you have to go to musescore.org to download it. It's not pre-installed. But if you go to musescore.org under the download menu, in fact, let me just show you how to do that because that feels like that would be a useful thing, right? If I go to musescore.org, download plugins, etc. And then you'll find uh, the tempo changes plugin down here. There it is. And somewhere or other you can find instructions. You would think that on this page right away would be instructions on how to install them, but you have to go to the handbook for that. So handbook, and then you can learn about how to install them. So temp changes is the name of that plugin. So 6/8 is not counted as 6/8 notes. It's counted as two dotted quarter notes. And that's just always the case in 6/8 and in general in compound meter. Anytime we have the the numerator of the fraction divisible by 3 and the denominator something bigger than 4. That's kind of the general thing. Some people might quibble about whether 3/8 should be considered compound or not, but whatever. 6 over anything is considered compound. 6/4, some people would consider compound, some people not, doesn't matter. But 6/8 definitely is. So it's two dotted quarters. So when I add a tempo marking here, uh, if I go to the tempo palette and add a dotted quarter is 80, you'll see that the tempo marking says dotted quarter is 80. But if you look over here in the inspector, you'll see it's actually showing 120 as the tempo. That's because internally MuseScore always thinks quarter notes. It doesn't know compound meter from anything else, from the meters, the rock group. It just knows beats. Internally, a quarter note is a beat. So even though this tempo says 80, if I change this to 120, you'll see that the inspector has now changed to 180. So it is really basing its notion of what the tempo is on quarter notes. So that's something you would need to know if you ever want to enter a manual tempo in here, that it's actually scaled to the quarter note. That's something that you'll have to maybe do a little bit on. One other thing as far as talking about units. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I talk about are the units used. As of MuseScore 3.6, I mean, yeah, 3.6, which is what I'm again using here. Check this out. Line 3. I'm entering some text that's multiple lines long. In the inspector is now a new field that allows you to control the spacing of those lines. And the unit is LI for line. So it's the line spacing. So the default is the whatever one. That's the default line spacing for the font itself. But if I change that, now I can get wider spaced lines or tighter spaced lines. So that's been a feature that has been requested a long time and really wasn't that much work to implement. I didn't do it, but I can't imagine that would have been. I can't imagine that would have been a whole lot of work. It's just something that no one ever got around to before, and we finally did. So that's a unit. Then also, of course, for fonts, there's points. I think maybe someone who has a background in typography can tell me this, but a point is, I think, literally 1/72 of an inch. Or is that a pica? That might be a pica or a pica. Um, yeah, maybe a point is actually more like a sixth of an inch. Ah, no, I should know this. 10 points isn't anywhere near an inch, right? So, whatever it is, it's a unit that has some relationship to whatever. Um, okay, yeah. So, Colleen, we do need to figure that out, and try to remind me at the end, or just shoot me an email afterwards, and we'll try to get you straightened out there. Um, but basically, I can tell you one thing about MuseScore. Anyone else who's having this problem, where MuseScore 3 just shuts down instantly as soon as you start it up, the up the updater, the program that updates programs with built into Windows, has, I would call, a bug in it. I don't know. We don't know exactly what the issue is, but apparently there's one of the files that MuseScore needs that doesn't get updated properly. And even though it does on most people's systems, but on some systems, for some reason, it doesn't. And so what you generally need to do is like uninstall. If you get to this problem where MuseScore just as soon as you start it up just crashes right away, try uninstalling it and reinstalling it. That'll probably fix it. You might have to reboot first. Windows also has a repair option that'll fix that problem. For some reason, every once in a while on Windows, people see that problem, and that tends to fix it. Okay, so yeah, those a couple units there. Points are whatever they are. Yeah, I should know what they are, right? So maybe someone look that up for me and tell us exactly what a point is. But it's some fixed unit that has to do with inches. You know how many of them are in an inch, and that's what the size of a um, the font is. But remember, the everything in MuseScore relates to that staff space setting. So if I go to Format, Page Settings, and I change the staff space, make it bigger, and this is just millimeters. Now my staff space is bigger. Suddenly, this font is still 10 points as far as the inspector is concerned, but it's much bigger now, right? That's because it scaled, it got bigger. Everything scales with staff space in MuseScore, other than the things that say not to. So, like the title, notice the title didn't get bigger. That's because the title specifically says don't follow the staff size. And the idea is mostly if you're making the score smaller, not bigger. If you're making it bigger, maybe you want the title bigger. But if you're making the score smaller, like to fit an entire orchestra on one page, it doesn't mean you want a tiny title. So the title doesn't scale. Um, the Also, measure numbers don't scale for the same reason, and that's new with 3.6, by the way. Again, when you make it bigger, it might look a little strange, but in the case where you're making your score smaller, like to fit a whole orchestra on a page, then you probably don't want the measure numbers so small that they're unreadable. So we keep the title full size, we keep the measure numbers full size, and pretty much everything else scales. So that's something else to know about how these numbers here work. So what else can I tell you? As far as actually operating the numbers that have any relevance in the user interface, that's most of the things that I would want to talk about as far as like units and things. There's a couple places where percentages show up, right? So this 100%. So this is something that some of you may not be experiencing because, again, every system is different. But in theory, this page here, let me close the inspector, close the palettes for a minute. This page here on my screen, I have I don't know, 12-inch, 13-inch, something like that screen. On my screen, this page is exactly the same size as a piece of paper. If I could hold up a piece of paper, I can hold up a piece of paper here, but you wouldn't be able to see it because the camera won't pick it up. But this is exactly the same size as a piece of paper um, at 100%. That's the way it's supposed to work. On certain systems, depending on the resolution of your monitor and how your operating system treats scaling and high dots per inch monitors and things, you might come up with a situation where at 100% your page isn't the right size. We do have a command line override that will allow you to tell MuseScore what the actual resolution of your monitor is. And then when you do that, then 100 will actually be life size. So that's something to know. So percentage there means percentage of life size. In the style dialog, there's a number of places where we use percentages for other things, like swing. Hey, look at that. Um, you can make swing. So 60% is the swing ratio by default. If I enter some eighth notes, oops, I entered this in 3 in 6/8. I don't really want to do that. Let me undo all this and go back. And okay, so if I play this now, because I just undid everything, I think it's going to be straight. But if I go to the style dialog again and tell it I do want my eighth notes to swing, this 60% will control that ratio there. Let me give it a stronger ratio. And actually, if this doesn't work, it's because of a bug that just got fixed. Yeah, so this is really silly, but I just made reunion swing when I did that. So that ratio that's in that swing settings here is basically how much of the beat is taken up by the first note of each pair. 75% basically turns it into a dotted eighth 16th. 66 would turn it into triplets. Somewhere around 60 is what, true swing might be. It's very subjective and tempo dependent. It's not quite as exaggerated as triplets, um, but it's not just straight eighth notes also. And if I bring those palettes back, the same exact ratio applies if I make the swing happen by instead of in fact normally I don't use the style setting. I just happen to see it there, so I wanted to show you. But normally you would do swing using text there, and it then has properties that let you control that same ratio, and you have that 60%. So, and the nice thing about that is doing it this way is then you can also straight on here. Yeah, straight is in here. You can then turn it off by adding the straight text. Okay, so within the style dialog, you'll see a whole bunch of settings that are all like this is a new 3.6 thing here. How much to indent the first system? 5 spaces is the new default. Used to not previously it wouldn't indent at all, so now it's just a checkbox to control whether it indents or not, and then a setting to control how much it indents. And it's measured in staff spaces so that it will scale as the score gets bigger and smaller and so forth. Most of the settings that you see that have any numbers are like this is how much padding to put inside parentheses around accidentals. That's another new 3.6 thing. Boy, I'm running into a lot of new 3.6 things, so that's pretty cool. So in page settings, uh, okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks, Finula, 72nd of an inch, and Pika is 12 points. Great, fabulous. So the question from James is about the page settings dialog and what to use. So let me just finish this observation about this. If I add an accidental here, accidentals. I need to get to the palette to show you what I'm doing here. I usually use shortcuts for just about everything. Let me add a sharp sign, and let me put a parentheses around it. Oops, not around the note head, but around the accidental. There we go. This padding here controls how much padding is around those accidentals. And that's, I think, a new setting because previously we guessed and it was generally not enough. So now we try to add a better amount and we make it customizable. Um, oh yes, glad that fixed it for you, Colleen. All right, so as far as the page settings dialog goes, all right, I'm in the United States. I'm used to thinking in terms of inches, right? But I don't. Okay, so here's the deal. If I change to inches here, suddenly my staff space is this tiny little number, and it's so small it's hard to make fine-tuned adjustments to it. At least my page size is what I expect, 8.5 by 11. But I don't know. I'm so used to thinking in terms of millimeters in this dialogue that I just leave it there personally. This number changed. The default scaling used to be this default staff space used to be 1.764. 1.764 millimeters. So now that we know how big a point is, it's 1/72nd of an inch. An inch is all right. I'm going to do some math here because why not? This is the number session, right? Um, an inch is 2.54 millimeters, centimeters, 2.54 centimeters. If I divide that by 72, I have 0.0352. What am I going to do here? If I multiply that by 5, I get 1.7. Okay, well, in millimeters, whatever. I multiply it by 10 to get millimeters instead of centimeters. Then I multiply it by 5, and I get 1.764. My point here is the original default for staff space was exactly 5 points. 1.764 millimeters was exactly 5 points. And, traditionally, points were a thing, right? This was physically how big these little pieces of metal were on your engraving plates when you're making these things. So, making a staff space exactly 5 points tall, kind of, it had to be something that was a logical number because the next size up would have been 6 points, which maybe would have been too big. So, so this was a traditional staff size back in the day. 1.764 millimeters because it's exactly 5 points. But no one uses physical metal types anymore, and most of the world uses millimeters, and suddenly 1.764 doesn't make so much sense. It doesn't even make that much sense in let me add that 764 and change it to inches. It's that, yeah, 0.69 inches, which means nothing to anyone, right? That it's just not a meaningful number, but it is exactly 5/72 of an inch for what it's worth. So we at some point during 3.6 development decided, you know what, that old traditional 1.764 staff size, it might have made sense 100 years ago. It doesn't make so much sense today. It's maybe a little bigger than is necessary. So they actually changed the default now. The default is now 1.75. So that is the new default staff size. What it does mean, though, is that all your point sizes are now a little smaller. A 10-point font is no longer really 10 points. It's it's that scaled down by whatever the difference between 1.764 and 1.75 is. Yeah, you didn't know I was going to make you do math, right? But in any case, so the staff space is now a little bit smaller. So 10 points, a 10-point font will now show up a little bit smaller than 10 actual points. Margins, the new defaults are 15 on all sides. So to me, that's fine. The old defaults were a little more. Uh, I forget. It was like less on the sides, more on top, something like that. Um, so thank you, Colleen. Um, yeah, the margin's now 15 millimeters. Whatever, that's fine. I don't care. I think normally in terms of inches, so this is a little more than half an inch. Half an inch margins are kind of what I think about. This is a little more than that, but whatever. I just don't mess with it. I typically leave it here. It's a little more annoying to me, though, that the default page size for a lot of people is A4, because for most of you who aren't in the United States, that's your normal paper. But I've never seen a sheet of A4 paper in my life, probably. It's all letter sized here, which is 8.5 by 11 inches. So, there's some more stuff. I mentioned there's some other things that I want to talk about as just to keep to my number theme, and as always, just ask me whatever. But so measure numbers. Measure numbers can be added by MuseScore automatically, and generally are. And if you've never done looked at that before, it's here in format style measure numbers. The default is every system, so you'll see it at the beginning of every line. But if you want, oh, and you can also control whether it shows on the first system. And then you can also make it show up on all staves if you have a score for like a whole, an ensemble. Checking all staves would make it show on each instrument. If you want it to show on every measure, you can, instead of every system, you're going to go with interval and tell it an interval of 1. And now every one measure, because some people like to show measure numbers every 5 measures, 1, 6, 11, etc. I don't personally recommend that approach, and I don't really know anyone that does, but it is something that is occasionally found. So we do. In fact, I don't know why we default to 5 in this box. I wish we defaulted to 1 in that box personally. Another new 3.6 feature, by the way, is that we can now show measure number ranges if you ask for it in multi-measure rests. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to press M to show a multi-measure rest, and we've always had multi-measure rests, and it'll show that 29 there, which is another number, of course. And there is a style setting for that. If I right-click that, let me think. I'm trying to right-click style. Is it going to take me to the measure? No, it took me to measure numbers. I want to go to multi-measure rests, or maybe it's just rests. To be honest, I don't remember where the multi-measure rests settings are. Rehearsal marks. Anyone see multi-measure rests in here, or rests in general? It's got to be in there somewhere, right? You would think that I would know this, but sometimes I just forget things, and things change. That's part of the fun in life. In any case, oh well, I guess this is just where the measure ranges are, but this is what's new here. This showing this 4 to 32, so you're knowing which measure numbers are actually in that rest. That's a new feature in 3.6 also. And so that was again in format, style, measure numbers. But it does bother me that I can't remember, because we do have a style setting to control. Oh, it's on the main score page. That's where it actually is. Multi-measure rests. Create multi-measure rests, and this is what determines the position of the thing. So, so if I increase that, you see the measure number got the multi-measure rest number got higher, and that's there so that in particular you can put it on the staff now, which didn't used to be possible. I think that got added. Maybe that got added at 3.5. To be honest, I can't remember which version added which feature. I just know that these are all fairly new features. Some of these things that I'm showing you. So, so more numbers for you. Fingering is a thing that a lot of people like to add in their scores, that a lot of people maybe don't know the easy way of doing this that we added like a year or so ago. So you can add fingerings one at a time. Select a note, click a finger, right? Well, this is kind of backwards. Let me do this better, like a real pianist. That's a 5, that's a 4, etc. So you can add these fingerings one by one, but here's a better idea. Under the Add menu, you'll see Add Text Fingering, and I've already defined a shortcut for it. I don't think there's one by default, but I've made it Control-Alt-F. You can just type that number and press space, and it moves to the next note. And now I can just press space and type my fingers and type fingering really fast that way. You don't have to use that command. You can just double click any fingering you want, and now the same thing. Space moves on to the next note. Shift space moves to the previous note. 4, 3, 2, 1. Would I really start with a C sharp with my thumb? I don't know. Doesn't matter. So the order of the categories on the left is designed to be sort of logical. So one question that always comes up in MuseScore is, why not alphabetize things? Well, there's good reasons to not alphabetize things because sometimes things that are related you might want to think of like together. Like in the palettes, clefs, key signatures, time signatures, we use these kind of together, right? You start off a piece with a clef, a key signature, and a time signature. They kind of belong near each other. It doesn't make sense to have them clef so far apart from time signatures when they appear in your score right next to each other. So we don't use alphabetical. We try to do things logically. So yeah, this is like big picture stuff. Score, page, sizes. The sizes are more percentages, by the way. This controls how big grace notes are, or if you designate one staff to be small. Like if you're writing a violin sonata, in the piano part, you'll have a full-size piano staff and a small violin staff. This controls how small that violin staff will be. So uh, this is all kind of big picture stuff here. The score, the page, sizes, header and footer, measure numbers, these settings that have to do with the system have to do with brackets. This is stuff that appears all throughout your score, kind of big picture stuff. But then we get into more nitty gritty detail of accidentals and bar lines and notes. Then we get into the settings that have to do with different kinds of lines that go across your score. There's slurs and ties, there's hairpins, voltas, octave markings, pedals, trills, right? These are all different kinds of lines. Then we get into different kinds of text down here. We have staff text, tempo text, lyrics, dynamics, rehearsal marks, figured bass, chord symbols. And then next to chord symbols is fretboard diagrams because they're related, right? Then finally, the actual text styles. So the staff text setting here is what determines certain things about staff text, like how far above the staff, how far below the staff your staff text would go, so that if you place it, if you hit X, like I don't know if you know that, but you can hit X to move anything. Like if I press X right now, boom, it's below the staff. Boom, it's above the staff. Those settings that we were just looking at control how far above, how far below. But in the most of the text style settings are here under text styles, and you'll see here staff text, and this controls the point size, the line spacing, the alignment, all these other things. So that's my answer. It's the most logical order that we could come up with, and we're constantly tweaking it, which is part of why I couldn't find the rest settings, because I'm pretty sure there is a pending change to create a whole new rests category in here that would go right below notes. I think in MuseScore 4 there's going to be that, because there's going to be some new capabilities in MuseScore 4 having to do with multi-measure repeats. Also, you can have 2-bar repeats, 4-bar repeats in MuseScore when MuseScore 4 comes, which is, not. If we're lucky, you'll see it in 2021. Don't bet on it, but might happen. Might happen. We're aiming for it. So anyhow, there will be, I think, a new rests category in here. So, yeah, so all of these settings, though, see how many settings are here? Like here's stem thickness. 0.11 staff space is the default, but if I start increasing that, hello, up arrow. Really? I can't use the up arrow in this box? Now I'm making my staff spaces, my stems thicker. I wonder why I can't use the up arrow in that box. That's totally bizarre. Yeah, that might be a bug relating to some of the other, this dialogue. So right now, you may notice that I'm able to go in the score and fiddle with the score while this dialogue was open. That was a really neat experiment, but it turns out it doesn't work. It creates a lot of problems. So that's one of the things, unfortunately, that by the time release happens, we're going to have to back that out. And I think maybe this. And now the arrow buttons are working in here. So yeah, I think that's one of the glitches that's a result of that. So these are all in staff space units, so that if you make the score bigger, you make the score smaller, then everything scales accordingly. And most of these settings are all in that staff space units. So another type of number we add in our scores a lot have to do with tuplets or tuplets, however you want to say it. And presumably most of you have a general idea of triplets. Some people may have struggled to come up to figure out how to do half, like quarter note triplets. In MuseScore, you always start with the duration of the entire triplet. So a quarter note triplet adds up to 2 beats. So I'm going to select the half note, then press Control 3, and I will get 3 quarter notes, because 3 quarter notes adds up to 1 beat. Now, what if I wanted, say, quintuplets? Well, I could press Control 5 and get 5/8 notes. Some people might prefer 5/16 instead of 5/8. There's some, or actually a bit more to the point. If I did 7, if I do Control 7, I'm going to get 7/8 notes. This is saying, because usually you'd have how many eighth notes in 2 beats? It would be 4 eighth notes in 2 beats. A 7-tuplet or septuplet is 7 notes in 2 beats, and most editors will notate that as 7/8 notes. In the same way that 3/8 notes in 1 beat. In other words, it's the note value a little bigger than what it should be. Like, this is a third of a beat. One of these is a third of the beat. So we have a choice between using a 16th, which is a quarter of a beat, or an eighth, which is half a beat. We round up, and that's the way most editors do. And so that's why we're getting 7/8 notes in here, because it should be a seventh of a beat. Some people would say, you know what, 7's a lot closer to 8. I'd rather use an eighth of that. An eighth of 2 beats is a 16th note. So if you want 7/16 instead of 7/8, here's how you do it. You go in here, you select your complete duration of half note, and you say add tuplets other. And we're going to enter a ratio that says we want 7 in the space of 8. If I'm doing my math right, this is going to give it to me. Let me make sure I'm doing my math right, then I'll explain what I did. Yes, it did. It gave me 16ths. So let's talk again about what I did here. By saying I wanted 7 note in the space of 8, what this is, you have to think what kind of note you want. I wanted 16th notes, and there's normally 8 16th notes in a half. So I want 7 notes in the space that would normally be 8. If I said 7 in the space that would normally be 4, normally there's 4 eighth notes in the beat. So not in the beat, in a half note. So now I have 7 eighth notes. If for some crazy reason I wanted 7 quarter notes in that space, within that half note, I can do that. I can say tuplets other 7 in the space of 2. And now I get 7 quarter notes in those 2 beats. That's going to confuse people to no end, but the point is you can do it. You have control over these sorts of things. You can also control, let me bring the inspector back. You can control whether that number shows just as a number or as that ratio, 7:2. So there it is. The number type is whether you want just the number or the full ratio or nothing. You can have nothing if you want. So yeah, tuplets are another thing that we deal with that has to do with numbers, and so that's another thing that I wanted to talk about. Seems like there was one or two others that oh yeah, I mentioned Roman numeral analysis, and so Roman numeral analysis was added, like I added that maybe a year ago, and if you haven't seen that, you just go to add text Roman numeral analysis, and again, I've defined a custom shortcut. The custom shortcuts, by the way, if you've never done that, edit, preferences, shortcuts, and here's a dialog where you can define your own shortcuts for a lot of commands. So in any case, I did the add text Roman numeral analysis. Control Shift R is my shortcut for it. Are you still here? Hopefully I'm still live. My display went froze for a second here. So when I do that, I can then enter Roman numeral analysis. 1, 5, 7. 1, 6, 4, right? I mean, and it's going to do all that formatting of things properly. So you enter the letters for the Roman numerals, the Arabic numerals, and it knows how to superscript everything, etc., the way it should be. If I let me turn off multi-measure rest for a minute. There's also Nashville Numbers, which is another system of numbering chords that some people use in Nashville, especially. I only know one person who actually uses them. Michael Olson, you around? Um, uh, I think you're the person who introduced me to that. So in Nashville numbering, you would say one for a one chord, and it'll actually play those back like it does chord symbols, and then 5, 7, and then 1/3. Oops, not cap, not. I'm thinking Roman numeral again. It's 1 slash. That's one chord in first inversion. They use numbers here to indicate scale degrees. So that's yeah. Hopefully, could someone just give me a little someone who's near their keyboard just let me know that I'm still live, because what I'm seeing on my phone looks confusing to me. It's showing me something that it shouldn't be showing me. So I feel like I can't prove that I'm live anymore. And I don't want to talk too long if I'm not. Let me yes, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation, Marcus. All right, so there's some other numbers there. There's another thing that happens that is when I was talking about staff space, there was another subject that comes up, and it has to do with spacing in general, how tightly spaced your music is. Let me remove all these line breaks here. So select all similar elements. Bye bye. And I'm going to enter some notes. Okay, I just wanted to get some notes in here. And of course, right now I still have all the, my stem is too thick. I have these weird settings. In fact, I'm just going to reset my style settings. If I go to Format Style, as of 3.6, there's a Reset All Styles to Default button. In previous versions, that capability existed. It was just, I think under the Tools menu somewhere in here was a Reset Style. No, it was right here, Reset Style. But now we've separated out because that affected both the style settings and the page settings. So it would also reset your page size. We've now separated those things out. So there's a Reset Page Settings in this dialog and a Reset Style in the other dialog. So 3.6 will have that going on. All right, so I'm back at my default style settings. This is the default spacing here for how close together these notes are. And I think that this default spacing, well, let me show you what it is. It's under Format, Style. In the Measure dialog is this spacing. And I think this has not changed. 1.2. What does that 1.2 mean? Well, um, thank you, and thanks for the lovely comments and the tips. I appreciate that. It's a nice new feature that I'm able to take advantage of here. So thank you. Um, so um, this spacing, the whole way MuseScore spaces notes out, it's a complicated algorithm, but it's designed to have something to do. In fact, if I showed you the code, it's the most bizarre looking code I've ever seen as far as the calculation. It involves logarithms and other things to calculate how much space to allocate after every note. The idea is that, well, we all know quarter notes are shorter than half notes and therefore should probably have less space, but it's not proportional. No one does it that way. No one makes a half note literally take twice the amount of space as a quarter note, or an eighth note take half the amount of space as a quarter note. No one does it that way. It's this sort of weird logarithmic thing. And it's actually overly complicated. But this number factors into that. That's the best way I can describe it. If I lower this, you'll see everything suddenly gets closer together. Lower it even more, it gets closer together still. Everything gets really, really tight. So the default 1.2 is this. It's just a factor that adds into that equation somehow. For some purposes, like if you're trying to squeeze as much orchestral music onto a page as you can, that's a good way to go. But for a lot of purposes, like lead sheets and things like that, this is way, way too crowded. So you can just increase this spacing. Like 1.4 is actually not a bad default for some purposes. But what I generally recommend is to leave the spacing tight, or in fact, even go even tighter, go all the way down to 1, which is like sort of the tightest spacing. Um, and then add your line breaks manually. If you add your line breaks manually, and I'm just hitting enter to do it, then the lines that need to have more stuff on it can take advantage of that tighter spacing. The lines that don't need it, you just add those line breaks. So it doesn't do any harm to set that thing really low, other than you'll need to add your own line breaks. And it's not a bad idea anyhow. But if you're trying to save yourself some work, that setting, just putting in a number there, because really you should be in control of your line breaks. You should not break in the middle of a phrase, in the middle. It's bad practice to have line breaks, especially page breaks, in the middle of a complicated phrase. So there's a lot of thought that goes into where breaks should go if you're a professional editor. So you really shouldn't just accept where your breaks are. But if you don't have the time to really obsess about that because you're writing an orchestral score and you got a ton of parts and you just can't be bothered, I don't blame you. Then yeah, that spacing setting lets you pick a value that just basically gives you something you like. So that spacing value, though, is what is overridden with the stretch setting. So if I select these measures, let me go back to Format, Style, and change that spacing back to the default 1.2. If I then press the left curly brace, is what I just did now. I'll press it again. Now I'll press right curly brace. Right curly brace is going to start spreading things out more. What this is format, stretch, increase and decrease stretch. What the stretch does is it basically overrides that 1.2 value. It lowers it or increases it accordingly. The left curly brace decreases it, and the right brace increases it just for the whatever measures are selected. You can also if you go to measure properties, right click here, measure properties, you can actually see that override here. 1 would mean no override. We'll just use whatever's in the format style setting for spacing. But this stretch setting is how much more stretched it is. So numbers bigger than 1, stretch it out more than that. Numbers less than 1, stretch less than that. So those are some other numbers that can affect spacing in your score. All right, so I've talked about everything that I meant to talk about. One of the things that I had mentioned in the thing, I guess I didn't mention that I should, is just the idea of minimums and maximums. First of all, in MuseScore, a lot of people wonder, wow, MuseScore is free. What are the limits? Because there's this free version of Sibelius, there's a free version of Finale, a free version, I think, of Dorico, but they're very limited, right? They'll tell you, well, as long as you only write with 8 staves, you can't write an orchestral piece. You can only have 8 staves, or you can only have this many measures, or can only do that. There's no such limits in MuseScore. No arbitrary ones like that anyhow. So you could have as many staves as you want. If I go to the instrument dialog, I could write a score for flute, 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 flute. So I've just added, I don't even know how many flutes, but a whole lot of flutes. And my score will now have a whole lot of flutes. Now, way too many to fit on the page, right? So I'd have to go to page settings and make the staff size smaller. Is that as small as it can go? No. And probably make my page size bigger. Like instead of letter page, I could go with legal page. Is that going to fit? No, I've just added so many crazy numbers of staves that it's just, oh, look, I finally got it to fit. I got a small enough staff size and a large enough page that all those flutes now fit. There are no arbitrary limits like that in MuseScore. But certain settings have their own limits, like the minimum, things that make sense. Minimum note distance. You can make your notes physically touch. If I go with 0 for that, well, I need to make this bigger again. Let's zoom in. If I delete all these line breaks again, I can get note spacing so tight that these notes will physically touch. Maybe if I enter 16. There you go. The only reason you don't see them physically touching right now is just because uh, I think because I would have to change the spacing again. But in any case, you can get them to physically touch. Just take my word for it. So there's certain limits in that are just sort of arbitrarily like, oh, you can't get below 0 for this or whatever. But for the most part, MuseScore has no built-in limits on things like how many instruments or anything like that. So yeah, it was a lot of different things that I talked about just because it was a topic on my mind, and it just allowed me to just jump all over the place and show a bunch of things, and hopefully some of it was useful. I, as always, will greatly welcome your suggestions for topics. I want to talk about what interests you. And so in coming weeks, whatever you want to hear about, I'm happy to talk about. Sometime fairly soon, I probably want to give you a preview of MuseScore 4. It's nowhere near at a place where I can actually show you anything really important about it. I can show you maybe a couple things about it. But it's still got way too much work on it before it's really anything I could demonstrate. But just to give you an idea of some of the things that are coming, I'll probably do that sometime soon. And hopefully, maybe I'll be able to do some interviews. Maybe I'll try to see if I can get Martin to come on and Martin Tentacruel to come on and give us a little talk about some of his ideas. Oh, stacking order. Oh, yeah, stacking order is a cool thing, and it does relate to the number thing. So let me just create a new score because that score is so crazy. Stacking order is the order in which things appear on top of each other. So what do I mean by that? Let me add a text here, staff text, and now I'm going to create an image. So if you don't know about this camera icon lets you take little pictures. So let me take a picture here. Control C, we'll take the picture, and then Control V. And there's my little image. So I'm going to turn off automatic placement for that guy so they'll be allowed to collide. I now have a text and I have an image. Which is on top of which? Well, right now the image is on top. And you can tell that because it's covering up the text. So what I would need to do is I need to raise the stacking order of the text. So if I go up and up and up and up, eventually the text now is on top of that image. So it controls the order of which things are drawn. So for the most part, they don't matter, but it does when something needs to be partially transparent and show through like this. So if you have an image that you want to obscure something behind it, then use it. So in Reunion, for instance, I use that to effect in Reunion, where at the end, oh, well, okay, I have to adjust this. I had added some little images that were just white boxes. Here's one. And I think the stacking order must have changed somehow. So there we go. Somehow the stacking order changed. So I had fine-tuned the stacking order of these images so that they would let the tie kind of break and not be as messy as that. And somehow when I reset all my settings, I think I reset those. So that's what that's about. So, all right. So I would like to thank everyone for being here. And again, feel free to drop more comments in here about ideas or email me, mark@musescore.com, Mark with a C at musescore.com. And also, okay, so I'm going to try to get in the habit of doing little commercials for myself. This MuseScore Cafe brought to you by my class, my course, right? So, brought to you by the Mastering MuseScore School, in which, if you want to learn way more about MuseScore and hear me talk more concisely and less rambly about MuseScore, you can sign up for the Mastering MuseScore complete online course, which I highly recommend. Great course, and that's a great way to support what I do. So, definitely encourage you to go to school.masteringmusescore.com and check out what I have. there, and I'll even post it into the chat because I gotta um, yeah, that's my commercial. So, thank everyone again for being here, and I will see you next week. But also remember tomorrow, those of you, well, any of you are welcome to join us in the music masterclass tomorrow, which is basically me doing the same thing I just did today, except talking about music instead of talking about MuseScore and talking about my music, talking about your music. I go critique your pieces, and we listen to them, and we've been having a lot of fun with that. So by all means, check out the Music Masterclass, and you can get that from that same link that I just posted, and you can click there and get more information on how to enroll. It's free, and same time tomorrow. So I will see some of you tomorrow, see some of you next week, and hope everyone has a great week, and talk to you all later. As soon as I find out the hang up button here.